I think we're in a new age where people are trying to form themselves, and they're trying to say, "This is who I am," and trying to create their identity by themselves. And I think what the Jedi Order teaches us, and the Master Padawan teaches us, as well as spiritual direction and religious life, is that we really cannot form ourselves. We need others to help us in the formation. Of course, we have a major role in that, but we do need the mentor. We do need others to help us keep us. And I think even in religious life, that was, for example, Dominic's greatest insight, that in order to truly discover what it means to live the gospel, it cannot just be you and the Bible. It has to be the community also that is shaping you, basically discerning the Spirit with the Holy Spirit.
Father Alejandro, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me, Benjamin. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Yes. So before we jump in, I'd like to ask, how did you first become interested in Star Wars? Where did this love start?
Well, it started when I was very young. So I was in the third grade, 9 years old, back in San Diego, California. And that's when Star Wars came out in 1977. So when it first came out, it was something very different from any sci-fi we had at the time. So at that time, the most classic, although it was older, was Space Odyssey 2001. And that was the classic kind of philosophical, kind of slow moving films, but really deep. But as a child, that really didn't excite me. But when Star Wars came out, that was a complete revolution. It was like something we have never seen before. And I got to see it 30 times.
30.
So 30 times. So it was almost like a Disneyland ride. We just got out and we went back in and saw the next one and out and in as much as we could. Our grades went down at school. I remember even the bishop calling a meeting of the school and the parents, and because all the grades were going down at the time. So all of us were just starstruck with Star Wars. So really, it made a great impact in my life. And I think what really caught my attention, even as a young kid, was that I saw the mythical aspect of it. It was just epic. And so, yes, there were shootings and starships here and there, and the whole kind of cowboy and Indian kind of show. But also, I mean, we already detected even back then, as a little kid, the epic of and the mythic aspect of it. So, and I think that's what's remained all the way to today.
And Father, now I'd like, for our conversation to focus in particular on the character of Anakin Skywalker and his kind of emotional and spiritual journey. We're introduced to him on Tatooine. He's a young boy. Qui-Gon Jinn, who's a Jedi master, senses, the Force is strong in him. He's then trained by Obi-Wan Kenobi. Can you share with us a little bit, what do you think of this concept of the Force? What do you make of it?
Well, first of all, I think, yes, so the prequels that came much later, and then the original trilogy basically is the life of Anakin Skywalker. So basically, it's his story. And I think throughout at least those first movies, what the Force is also developed throughout. So I think George Lucas has been very clear, and as we see also in the film, as Ben Kenobi explains to Luke Skywalker in New Hope, what the Force is, for them is basically an energy field that sustains and unites all living creatures. And also the Force can be used as a force for good, but also for bad. And so I think that's the original concept of it, and especially George Lucas' concept. But it's also an impersonal force. It's an energy field, as he explains it. And I think it's closer more to what Zen Buddhism or Taoism would understand, kind of the energy of the world and so on. So less Christian. But as the stories progress, and also as new writers have written about it, especially my favorite Dave Filoni, it's gone deeper. And I think that for him especially, the Force has changed more to something that knows, something that guides. So it's more of a personal, spiritual. So from coming from a Thomistic perspective, I will not say is God, or it tries to represent God. And also many people that write on homiletics and theology and Star Wars will compare it to the Holy Spirit sometimes. But I think it's more what Aquinas would call the order of creation. So according to Thomas, of course, God creates with order. So with intelligibility. So it's not chaos that we have in the creation in the world. Everything is ordered. Everything's placed in the moral order created by himself. And so I think that's what is being reflected in the Force. And especially when you consider that even for Thomas, the way we behave towards God, towards each other, towards ourselves has an impact. And so if we behave in a virtuous way, we have a positive, a balanced way in our relationships with ourselves, with others, and with creation. And when we behave in a vicious way, in a negative way, then we have a negative impact. So that kind of connects to what George Lucas and the whole Star Wars series talks about, the balance and the imbalance of the Force. That the actions, how we use the Force, how we act within the Force has an impact. So either for positive or for negative. And so I think it's closer to what Thomas would call this order of creation. So this set of relationships between ourselves, God, and creation. And that how we act morally has an impact in that creation, in that order that God has established, for better, for worse. So, and that's where the whole story of original sin comes in, and personal sin, where basically we distort the order of God because it becomes a selfish thing, the way of the Sith, as opposed to one that is for the other, constructive of relationships, constructive and supportive of that moral order created by God. So that would be my view, kind of from a Thomistic perspective, of what the Force would be similar to in a mythical way. So I wouldn't say it's a Christian perspective that is presented in Star Wars, but definitely from a mythic perspective is presented as this order that exists in creation, and that somehow it becomes imbalanced by our actions and balanced by our virtuous actions.
And Father, we are also introduced in the first film to the Jedi Order. What are your thoughts on this knightly order? Are there any spiritual parallels to entering a religious order like the Dominicans?
There's many things that are very common in religious life and to the order. There's even one Dominican in Anchorage, Alaska, that somehow can turn the Dominican habit into a Jedi habit. So you have to see the videos on YouTube. So there's a lot of commonalities. I think the main thing would be the importance of community. So the Jedi live in communities, and then also the Dominicans, like ourselves, we live in community. The question of formation also is very important in the Star Wars and in the Jedi Order. So is the masters and the Padawans that are formed into the Force. And so also we ourselves are formed into becoming more Christ-like and coming to know Christ even more. So it doesn't come from nowhere. It's a personal and directed formation. And also the role of meditation. So one of the main highlights of the more spiritual aspects of the Jedi Order is their contemplation and meditation and the role that plays in their lives, which tends to be more Zen Buddhist than Christian. But meditation is part of our life as we contemplate the scriptures, as we contemplate the liturgy, theology, philosophy. It's also part of that contemplation of basically, as St. Thomas Aquinas said, to contemplate the truth in order then to give those fruits unto others. So what is not like the order, and I think this is very important because it's a very interesting distinction, is that in Zen Buddhism, but also in especially in the Jedi Order, and I think this is what gets Anakin into trouble later on, and that's why I want to mention it, is that they definitely emphasize detachment. So the Jedi is not supposed to have any kind of attachments, any kind of emotional attachments, because that therefore creates fear, that creates distraction from the way of the Force. And so, as we'll see later on, Anakin Skywalker struggles with this, this detachment regarding his mother, the detachment then regarding Padme. And so that's something that we don't see in religious life. So our Christian perspective is like we don't preach that kind of detachment because what we really value is love. And so the real question for us as religious is not the detachment thing, but more what do we love and how we should love it. So that depends on the circumstances, the people, the community, and so on. But we emphasize love. So they're reaching out towards the other, not separating ourselves from the other. But the question is what we should love and what we shouldn't love and how we should love it according to the different characteristics and closeness to us. And that's the order amoris that Thomas Aquinas speaks of, and also St. Augustine. So it's that order of love that he talks about, which I think, in one sense, that is not part of the Jedi way, and that comes up in the sequels also, where Luke Skywalker, in thinking of rebuilding the Order after the collapse of the Order, that's one of the issues he really struggles with, whether to maintain that kind of detachment and within the Order. And I think he tends to change. No, we need to start reaching out to other people. So that would be a major difference.
And then, Father, with regards to detachment, one of the big themes within that formation is the emotional relationship that's developed between a Padawan and a Jedi Master, and we see this with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. We see that with Obi-Wan and then Anakin, and then Obi-Wan as well, and his development and formation of Luke. Can you speak a little bit on this dynamic that has a lot of emotional valence within the series?
Yeah, I mean, I think like any kind of mentorship, there's a relationship that is very, very intimate. And it's a relationship that's not created by blood bond or by kind of emotional bond, but it's really a mentorship. And so in those mentorships, we are vulnerable. We are, in one sense, kind of revealing the dark side as well as the light side and looking for guidance. And then the master is there to basically guide us to bring out the best of us. And also in the mentorship, hopefully the mentor, the master, knows what is the best of us. And that's what he's trying to bring out. So it's a very, very close relationship. And it's very similar in our Christian tradition where we have spiritual direction. And so in spiritual direction also is this relationship that is established between the spiritual master and the one being guided, that is intimate, close, more, sometimes it's even closer than you would have with your own family, because you talk about issues that you wouldn't necessarily talk with the family. But here you talk because you're trying to discern what is God's call or voice within this life circumstances. So I think that is reflected in the Jedi Order, but also in the Sith. So we see this mentorship. So you can be mentored towards good, or you can be mentored towards evil. And we see that also in real life. You know, that some people, learn evil from other people. They see other people doing what they're not supposed to do, and that's what they do because they see this. So it's a very important aspect of daily life, I think. And also, I think, especially in today's society, where a lot of people feel, I think we're in a new age where people are trying to form themselves. And they're trying to say, this is who I am, and trying to create their identity by themselves. And I think what the Jedi Order teaches us, and the Master Padawan teaches us, as well as spiritual direction and religious life, is that we really cannot form ourselves. We need others to help us in the formation. Of course, we have a major role in that, but we do need the mentor. We do need others to help us, keep us. And I think even in religious life, that was, for example, Dominic's greatest insight, that in order to truly discover what it means to live the gospel, it cannot just be you and the Bible. It has to be the community also that is shaping you, basically discerning the Spirit with the Holy Spirit. And I think that's what we see in the Jedi Order. We see that in religious life. And I think that's something that is lacking today. So I think a lot of people are trying to search for mentors, but they tend to kind of look to themselves and try to form themselves. And so that has some good aspects, but also a lot of negative aspects, because very easy we can delude ourselves.
And Father, I'd like now to turn our attention to Emperor Palpatine. So if we zoom out, during this time, there's the Clone Wars, which is a galaxy-wide conflict between the Galactic Republic and the Separatist movement. And during this period of major battles, there's a lot of political maneuvering by, at the time, Senator Palpatine, who secretly is orchestrating both sides of the war. What do you make of Palpatine?
Well, I mean, Palpatine is a great villain. And I think part of this is because, again, he's the mythical villain. And so, like everything and especially in the original series, which is more mythical than the new ones, evil is evil, good is good, you know. And so Palpatine is the incarnation of 100% evilness. And so I think he's very, very much close to the biblical Satan almost. And so he incarnates evil incarnate. And he, like the devil, doesn't use force. to do any of those changes, even with Chancellor, but even as he becomes emperor, he never uses force. It's, I think one of his greatest virtue is patience. There's a lot of patience. So he's been working on creating this empire for years and years, slowly manipulating, telling half truths, basically saying what you want to hear. And basically, that's what he's doing through his whole lifetime to be able to reach ultimate power. And he's been working this very slowly throughout the ages, which is what we see in the movies. And so, yeah, he works basically like the biblical devil. So, which he whispers to us half truths and basically tells us what we want to hear to tempt us into the dark side. And so, I think the way he's portrayed, that's it's what true evil is. So it's not this force that just kind of by brute force, forces you into the dark side, but it's more subtle. It's more of the sensation of temptation, I think. And that's what he presents to both Anakin, and then he presents also to Luke later on.
And Father, if we can just sit on that relationship between Palpatine and Anakin in particular, how do you see him manipulating Anakin? I mean, Anakin is a character who is at the summit of his Jedi training. He's going to be an incredible, Jedi master. He has an incredible relationship with Obi-Wan, who loves him almost like a father-son. How does Palpatine wedge this divide in there slowly and then, break it up?
Well, I mean, like Satan always knows our weaknesses. So he knows exactly where to hit us and how to tempt us. And so, I mean, Anakin is a very interesting character. And so you have to see the prequels to really understand everything that's been there since the very beginning. So in one sense, that he turns to the dark side is not a big surprise, because from very young age, one of the things that really motivates him for a lot of things that he does is unfortunately fear. And so fear, of course, as Thomas Aquinas would say, is not necessarily a negative thing. So it's more whether when it gets detached from reason and is used correctly. So for example, we are supposed to be fearful of dangerous things, not to endanger our lives or that of others. So that's good fear. But also there's this fear where you're just simply will do the wrong thing in order to avoid that fear. And so from a very young age, he was afraid of losing his mom. He was afraid of death. He was afraid of losing Padawan later on, and Padme. And then he was afraid of death itself. And so this is what kind of begins to motivate. That's why he wanted to become the strongest, most powerful Jedi there was, because he wanted to somehow get rid of this fear, or somehow at least control this fear. And I think that's where Palpatine and the Emperor see the weakness of Anakin. And so that's where he starts working on him. And so it says, oh, so, have you ever heard the legend of Plagueis, and so how he, has the power to basically bring somebody back from the dead. And so he reaches exactly where his fears are. And from that, he brings them to the dark side. But the conversion towards evil basically doesn't start at that point for Anakin. It started when he was already a little boy, all those traumas that he had, and that he was not able to let go of those fears. And instead of trying to control that, basically to, kind of go with the Force, you would say, in the Star Wars universe. And I think that's how the Emperor gets, because he knows exactly what are the weaknesses of Anakin. And that's how he brings it to his side.
And so, Father, when do you think it truly goes wrong for Anakin? Is there an exact moment that we could point to in the films where the audience can be like, there it is, that's the moment where he's turning?
Well, I think it is, yeah. So like I said, it's all been his whole life. And so as we see throughout the whole series, the Clone Wars, etc., he's beginning to make those choices where he's acting a lot of times out of fear and out of pride. Those are the two basically vices of Anakin, and very strong ones. And so we see that from the very beginning.
But Father, could we say that it could perhaps be starting with his love for Padme, because that forces a relationship that's based on lying and deception? Because that relationship, as a Jedi Knight, he's not permitted to be in this type of relationship with a woman, and then she's pregnant, and there's that. There's that
well,
fear.
definitely that plays a major. I think it goes even further back, though. I think it goes with his mom. So I think when Queen Young picks him up at the planet to take him for training, and basically he was a slave like his mom, and for some reason he gets freed, and of course there has to be a way the emperor intervenes to free also his mom, but his mom doesn't get freed. And so then he has to separate from his mom, who is the only one he has in life. There's no brothers, there's no sisters, there's no father. So this is the only emotional connection that he has. So I think it begins there. And so then that gets reflected in his relationship with Padme, because then with Padme, he's afraid of being alone. That's one of his biggest fears, of losing those he loves and being alone. And so Padme becomes for him also that kind of this is what I'm going to hold on to support my emotional. So I would say it's not really love, that he really loves Padme, is more that he finds in her, okay, this is something I can use for my emotional support. And that's how, so it doesn't have what we would call Christian love, which is sacrificial love, that he would be love for her and do whatever he needs to do for her. But it's more what you have to suffer for me. So you have to be there for me. And I think that's also a reflection from what already was happening with his relation with his mom. And I think that's why the prequels are very important about that relationship with his mom, because that trauma you begin to see there of separation, or his fear of separation, the fear of the one he loved, and then she gets killed. So he also loses her, and he has the dreams about losing her. Then those dreams repeat again with Padme, that he dreams that she's going to die when she gives birth. So basically, it's the same story. It gets repeated again because it's the same fear that's been driving him through this whole period.
And so, Father, you would say that Anakin does not actually love Padme in the Christian sense.
Yeah, I agree. So I think he's basically using her this is my emotional support, and so then he becomes controlling, he becomes jealous, he becomes manipulative, even of Padme, because it's not true love in that sense.
Why do you think, Father, that Anakin bows the knee to Palpatine in that moment where Palpatine kills Mace Windu?
Well, I mean, and you have already asked originally, one was the moment that he kind of, okay, now he's evil. Now so like I said, it was a long process. So, it's not a cliff fall. It's a slippery slope. And that's how we fall into sin and even worse things. It's not an overnight thing. Some spiritual directors will say, really, we do not commit mortal sins. It's very rare. It's really more venial sins that keep accumulating. It's the same thing we keep repeating, and we just keep justifying and falling into it. So I think by that time, when he falls to his knees before Palpatine, basically he's just confirming what the path he has already been into. And because he had already been on that path for quite some time, he doesn't go back to the Jedi, because the Jedi basically remind him of what he was supposed to be, but now he cannot be, or he won't be, or he doesn't want to be. And I think that's the main reason, because he sees in St. Thomas Aquinas will say, passions, evil passions, the vice will cloud our mind. And so in one sense, we can no longer see the truth. And so we're so caught up already on this path. And I think that's what happens to Anakin. So Anakin has closed himself up. So this is the only way I can kind of face my fears and so on. And so this is the only way, and there's no turning back. And I think that just simply confirms when he promises allegiance to the emperor. But that's been going on for a while. And he's already been separating from the Jedi. So he's been kind of fighting with the council that they don't make him a master. He's also fighting with Obi-Wan. This is his best friend, but now he doesn't really trust him, and that he's holding him back from being all he can be. So that's been also growing for a while. And so he's beginning to lose his connection to the Jedi. And this is just the final culmination.
And how should we understand concupiscence in light of this example?
Concupiscence, well, I mean, again, it's more the question of fear and pride. And so, like you said, and so I think it's this desire for security. And but that at one point we don't find security in controlling things. And I think that's what he does. So for him is through control, then I can get rid of the fear or somehow control the fear. But that's not the way we get rid of it. It's again, as St. Thomas Aquinas talks about the virtue. So we need to canalize that fear, that energy, that emotion towards the good. So it's not to suppress it. So again, as I said originally, one of the big differences between our Christian perspective and that of the Jedi or Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, is precisely that question of this attachment. For us, no, the emotions are good, the passions are good, but the question is, how do we guide them? Do we use them for the good or for the bad? So it's not a question of suppression. It's a question of channeling to the right way. And so that was the answer for him too, to use all this passion for the good. But instead, it was just to control so he wouldn't have that fear.
And Father, in that moment, so he bows the knee to Palpatine, and within, let's say, a matter of hours, he's killing younglings. I mean, that's an extraordinary change. And it's a fall that the only parallel I can really think of is Lucifer's fall, where you're the highest angel to Satan. What do you make of that immediate and radical transformation?
Well, I mean, I think we said St. Thomas Aquinas will talk about despair. And I think that's what he reached at that point. So once we have despaired, basically, yeah, we would do things that we would never imagine we could actually do. Because at that time we're in desperation. So we lose the sense of value, the sense of balance. And so we're just reacting. We're just kind of falling. And in this case, he's falling into the anger. He is basically the Jedi have betrayed us. The whole Republic has betrayed us, etc. And so it's just this anger that he has inside, and it's basically just manifesting itself. So again, once we start on that life of vice, yeah, we get blinded, and it's a slippery slope. And yeah, we end up doing things we wouldn't even dream we could do, because we're so blinded by it, or by the passion. In this case, it would be anger.
And Father, could we also make a parallel with the despair and hopelessness that Judas felt in his betrayal?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that Anakin Skywalker is basically the Judas archetype. And so he is the beloved disciple that basically betrays the Jedi and the light side of the Force because of fear and because of pride. And so definitely that's what he does. The difference, of course, between Judas and Anakin is that at the end, Anakin is able to, and we see this on the first trilogy, opens himself again to mercy with his son Luke. And so when he's, here, he says, yes, you have saved me already. So that was the difference. Judas falls into despair, and then he kills himself. So the logical consequence, logical in the sense that it's just the slippery slope to despair, and more despair to the end of life. But Leia, Luke have always seen, no, there's still good in him. So there was still a little spark there that could have been turned. And I think that's why we see in Return of the Jedi, Luke really working on that little flame that was there, because I know there's something there. And so that's what saves him at the end, which I think for Judas Iscariot, that was gone. So he just had the despair, I cannot be saved, I will never be forgiven, which I think you see Anakin also when Luke, when first sees Vader in Endor, and they have that conversation, so here, I know there's still good in you. I think Anakin's still there, blah, blah. And he says, that name has no meaning for me. So I think it's just like Judas. There's no forgiveness for me. This is the path I have chosen. There's no out, But then he himself recognizes towards the end, and that makes the whole difference. So that brings the redemption of Anakin Skywalker. That, thank goodness, Luke had seen constantly there and worked on that.
And Father, before I turn to Order 66, which I want to touch on, you mentioned Luke working on his father, Anakin, and that finding the redemptive quality, and that being kind of the center part of his kind of journey as a Jedi, or in his formation. Is there something different in Anakin's attempt for Jedi glory, if you will, in the sense of wanting to save Padme, that those two loves, those two guiding lights are different in nature?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I mean, Anakin and Luke are very similar. And I think it could have gone the same for Luke. And we see that when he is training with Yoda in Dagobah, and he goes into the cave. And so basically he confronts himself, and what he sees is Vader. And when he defeats Vader and the mask falls off, is his own face. So basically was saying, yes, this is part of your heritage. You could end up here, in this whole thing, becoming evil too, a Sith Lord. So, but I think that's also where we see, because it's both the story of Anakin Skywalker and the story of Luke Skywalker. And in the story of Luke Skywalker and Anakin, what we see is their choices. And that's what makes, because I think also Luke is fearful also. And I think he's also looking for companionship, a place of belonging. He didn't belong in Tatooine. He was looking for something else. And so he has the same fears in one sense as Anakin. I think Luke doesn't have the pride of Anakin. And I think that already makes him kind of different. But ultimately, it's the choices. So whereas Anakin, to confront his fear and confront his and support his pride, chooses basically control. And that's his whole thing. He chooses to control and to become the most powerful Jedi, to control all this. And that's how death is going to be kept away, and fear. Whereas Luke, I think, is more open to redemption, is more open to see, okay, where can this lead? How can we move forward from this and basically become a real master Jedi? And I think that's where Yoda plays a major role in basically helping him understand, wars don't make a warrior great, he tells him, because he's expecting also Yoda to be this great warrior, and then he sees this little green guy. But that's because he's trying to, this is not what the Jedi life is all about, is precisely this whole question of choosing the good, choosing the light. It's not about moving rocks and all that. It is really a path, And so I think Luke learns that quickly. And of course, you see also him rebelling against that. He leaves Yoda and goes to save his friends, although Yoda says he won't be able to help them. And actually, he's not able to help them. So we see also him struggling with that. But ultimately, he is making the right choice. And I think also when he is his father and in front of the emperor and so on, where he says, here I am, defenseless, strike me down. So it's kind of like would I kill baby Hitler had I known that he's going to be Hitler? Should I, I have the chance here, baby Hitler, should I kill him or not? And that's what he's confronted with, But he has already learned the way of the Force by that time and says, no, I will not do it. And he won't fight his father. He will not fight, because that's not the way of the Jedi, because that leads to anger, and then anger leads to everything else that Anakin Skywalker did choose. And that made the whole difference for the two of them.
And Father, can I posit a theory also on the differences in choices that Anakin and Luke make? And with regards to Luke not having the pride of Anakin, I wonder if Anakin did not have the benefit of those 30 years of the silent, hidden life that, our Lord had as well. Growing up 30 years where he was just quietly living his life. And Anakin, from the get-go, when he has a public life, when he's discovered by Qui-Gon and the Jedis, is told again and again and again, you are the chosen one. And he makes extraordinary progress and has an extraordinary training and youth and development in that sense. Luke, from the very beginning, he's humble existence, has no recognition on any level until he meets Obi-Wan. And I wonder if those years of silence were the difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think you caught on something very interesting there, which I didn't even think about. But very true. So I mean, I think first of all, like you said, Anakin is already being groomed to be the chosen one. So I mean, you're almost kind of grooming him for pride, because you are the chosen one. Qui-Gon tells him, I never seen someone with such a strength in the Force as a little kid that doesn't know anything about it. So he's kind of already set up to be a champion, basically. And so he's being trained for that. So I think also what he lacked was mentorship, because I think Ben Kenobi, Obi-Wan, I think, first of all, I think Ben Kenobi is the incarnation of what the Jedis are really supposed to be. Because Qui-Gon is a rebel. He's always fighting the system, and that's why he's not in the council. Even Ben Kenobi says, you would be in the council if you wouldn't be fighting them all the time. And even says, you will not fight them anymore, right? Regarding the training of Anakin, he said, I have to do what I have to do. So he's always been the rebel. And he's also teaching that to Anakin. But before when he dies or he's dying, he makes Ben Kenobi, Obi-Wan, promise that he will train the child. So that's what he takes him on, although he hasn't finished his own training. And so he's also kind of doubtful. And so I think I've read somewhere that basically Anakin really needed a father figure. He needed a Yoda, really. And Ben is more of a brother. He's your older brother, but more of a brother relationship. So in one sense, it's not that Obi-Wan failed in the formation of Anakin, but that Anakin really needed more of a father figure than a brother figure. And I think so that was also a lack. Whereas Luke, as you said already from the beginning, first of all, he never had these expectations. He was just looking more for adventure and so on. He was kind of the kid brother, your younger brother in the family. And then, of course, Obi-Wan knows he's the family. So it's more because he's part of the Skywalker family that he says he probably does have the Force. We need to train him. And Ben is older by that time also. So he has had a lot of experience. He's seen what happened before. So even the mentorship of Obi-Wan is a more mature one. But then he has the years with Yoda. And I think also that here's the father figure. And so he really guides them, like also Jesus going into the desert. So he has that more direct confrontation as opposed to kind of more discernment, I think. And I think Anakin really didn't get that discernment time. It was more, yeah, you're the chosen one, so you better prepare for this and da-da-da. And I think Luke is more, okay, so because they're also fearful that he will turn into the dark side. So both Yoda and Ghost Obi-Wan are cautious, it's like, okay, but okay, we're seeing this, that. So they are also training him in a way so that he won't fall. So I think, yeah, so that makes a big difference.
And then, Father, now I'd like to turn our attention to that fall and to go back to Palpatine executing Order 66. This is a unique moment in the prequel trilogy where clone troopers now turn on their Jedi generals. Anakin, who is now Darth Vader, is hunting down the last remaining Jedis. This is an extraordinary moment. What are your thoughts on Order 66?
Well, I mean, again, it was something that the emperor had planned a long time ago. So, I mean, for him, from the very beginning, he knew that the biggest obstacle to assuming full power were the Jedi. So that was the biggest obstacle. And so he'd been planning for this at one point when he had the chance to get rid of the Jedi. And so that's what he does with Order 66. So that was no surprise. And so it's already, because we already know it was not an order he just gave right there and then, but even in the building of the clones, it was already implanted in their brains that when he said that, they would react this way and turn on the Jedi. So it was planned way before. But I think basically we just see the culmination that once we kind of go on the dark side, it just keeps growing and growing and growing. And so it's like virtue. So we have vice and virtue. And so if we practice virtue, we live the good life, that goodness keeps growing. We become better people, And the same thing with sin. If we fall into vice and so we become worse people to the point that it becomes a world thing, Order 66, that even gets rid of people that were our friends, who were our allies, who were the ones defending us. And so we now can see them enemies because they're no longer, we're blinded basically by that fear and by that pride and by that search for power as it was that of the emperor.
And Father, in that moment, we have one Jedi who turns and becomes Darth Vader and wreaks, emotional, spiritual havoc in his own personal life that then manifests itself in the actions he's taking against his brother Jedi. But in that same time, in that one man's fall, we have what seems to be the fall of the galaxy, chaos in the galaxy now with this order. Are there any parallels? Can you speak to how one person's action can actually be reflected and magnified throughout the cosmos in that sense?
Well, I mean, also we are talking with very unique people here because both Anakin, was considered a great warrior. And so he was a great master already by that point, as we see in the Clone Wars, very close to the troopers. And so when high spiritual figure falls, it has a major consequence throughout, So it's even today when we hear of, scandals in the church and preachers that fall from grace and so on. I mean, it really has a consequence. It's not just a personal fall. It really makes a lot of people a scandal. So basically, a lot of people lose faith. A lot of people start doubting things. So it really has a ripple effect in a greater way than if it's just some kind of, somebody who is more obscure and so on that falls into this. So I think that's what we're seeing there. And so we see Anakin, we see supposedly the Chancellor who is looking out for the galaxy and so on, who turn, basically. And again, in a very, Palpatine in a very manipulative, so you want peace, now we'll have the first galactic empire and now we will have peace because this is what you always wanted. So he knows how to, talk to us. But it's because they are such high figures that's why they have that ripple. And I think that's why you feel it galaxy wide. But at the same time, as we continue the story, it is one little farm boy, that ultimately brings down the empire, ultimately converts the biggest villain, who at the time is Darth Vader, back to good, as just a simple farm boy who believed in the goodness of the other and of his father, and who believe on the light side of the force. And so his actions do make difference. So I think in the spiritual life, in Christian life is the same way. So any action, for good or for bad, has consequences throughout. When people ask me many times, well, why do I have to go to confession? Because I could confess to God directly. I do that every day. So at the end of the day, we Dominicans too, we have a kind of examination of conscience during Compline. And so you think about the day where you failed and where you were closer to God and ask for forgiveness and so on. So yeah, we can do that every day. But why do I have to go to confession? And I think one of the answers is that because no matter how hidden, whatever we do, for good or for evil, has consequences throughout the galaxy, we want to call it. So when we go to confession, we're basically confessing to God, we're confessing to the church, we're confessing to each other, to another human being, because everything we do, either personal, even if it's very intimate, it has consequences throughout. And so that gives us also great power, because we can change the world one step at a time. And even today, when we see a lot of aggression, a lot of conflict and so on, just to smile in the street makes a big difference, because you brought a little bit of joy to somebody in a world full of darkness. We want to do that. So it does make a difference. So any little action, it's the story of the widow also, that puts the little coin, just a small penny basically in the, but that may, because that was all her life that she puts in there. And so a little action does have major consequence.
And Father, speaking of the consequences of Anakin's actions, the climax of Episode 3 is, of course, that iconic battle of Mustafar between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker. Can you speak a little bit on that conflict and that moment that takes place in the volcano planet of Mustafar?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we see the consequences of what Anakin has chosen, and so basically he has created a hell for himself, and that's why their Mustafar is like hell, and so he has become part of that. And of course, Obi-Wan still loves him. He tells him, I loved you, and like a brother, and so on. And so, but by that time, what we see basically is the consequence of sin, and so basically he has closed himself in. One of the things that I think is very different from the kind of Star Wars mythology, but depends who you ask, but especially with Zen Buddhism and Taoism, is that it's not a yin-yang thing. So in the yin-yang tradition, basically you have the evil and good that needs to be balanced. That's the balance, And so that somehow we have to keep the two. In Christianity, for Thomas, for example, the evilness is the negation, is nothingness, So the good is everything, is the good. And the evilness is simply nothingness. And so it's not a balanced thing, it's basically the corruption of the goodness. And I think George Lucas also sees that, although he tends to be more on the yin-yang, but he's also saying, because even when they talk about what Anakin's supposed to be doing, which he does at the end, which is kill the emperor, kill the force of evil in the galactic empire is to basically destroy evil. So it was not a balance of, well, we have the emperor and myself living together. No, it was the destruction of evil. So ultimately, he has to have Christian perspective at the end of it. So I think that's what we're seeing in this battle between Ben Kenobi and Luke, and Anakin. So Anakin has already chosen the evil side, and he's so blinded that simply cannot accept love. I don't remember the movie right now. It stars Robin Williams, and I think it's "May Dreams Come" or something like that.
Yeah, May My Dreams Come True.
Maybe something like that. I thought that was the best depiction of hell. So his wife commits suicide and she ends up in hell. And of course, the whole story is that the character of Robin Williams is trying to bring her out of hell. And hell is not shown as a fiery place and that, as we always usually think of hell, but it's basically like an upside down cathedral. And it's just dark and she's there kind of like this, like in a trauma position, fetus position and so on, just completely locked up in herself. And heaven is right there. So all she needs to do is just simply stand up and walk into heaven. But she's so caught up into herself, so closed in, that she cannot do that, And so Robin, of course, tries to do that. And finally, thank goodness, he brings her back. But I think that's what you see in Mustafar. So, I mean, Anakin is completely closed already. In his anger, in his pride, he also thought he killed Palpatine at that time and so on. So he's just closed out. He cannot open himself to the love of Ben and the redemption that he's offering him right there and then. This is your chance to redeem yourself. Don't do this. But he's just full of anger and full of pride and blinds him to the reality. So he's close to is the consequence of all his choices, basically. And that's what we're seeing fighting right there. One more chance that he could, put his weapon down and join Ben Kenobi and come out and save. And then he would realize Padme was fine, but no, he chose himself. So that's why it reminds me also of this other movie, because basically in hell, somebody was saying, God continues to love us because God is love. He doesn't hate us, even in hell, but it's we who cannot respond to that. We're so closed in. And in one sense, that's the suffering in hell, that somebody's still trying to love us, although we don't want that. We don't want that love. And I think that's part of the suffering of hell. We see a little bit that on Dante's too, Divine Comedy. And I think that's what we're seeing there with Anakin Skywalker.
And Father, could you speak a little bit about the different understandings in violence between the Jedi and the Sith? Because there's that moment where Anakin is left burning. Both arms have been cut off by Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan looks at him and has the opportunity to kill Anakin. And Anakin, of course, as Darth Vader, will contribute and create a lot of suffering for everyone, but he does not kill him. And we've seen in certain depictions in different movies and in the stories, the Sith have a very different approach to violence.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think, well, first of all, like I always think Obi-Wan Kenobi is the incarnation, almost dogmatic, of what the Jedi is supposed to be, even more than the other characters. Even Yoda, I would say. Yoda is the wise master. Yoda's a wise master, but Obi-Wan is the rule guy. He's sticking to that tradition no matter what. And I think precisely at that moment, he's being a true Jedi. So he will never use violence to destroy. So the Jedi have always used, or supposed to use, violence for defense. Is the last resource. It's the only for defense. Is only to seek peace, and that's why they would use weapons like the lightsaber. So they would never do it for attack. And so basically, there he has accomplished what he was supposed to do: bring justice. So he basically stops Anakin, But then he leaves the judgment to the Force, And so we in Christian life will say the same thing, So we are called to stop evil. But then we leave the ultimate judgment to God himself. Who are we to judge? We don't know the heart of the people. And so I think so he did what he was, as a true Jedi, he did. So he just simply stopped Anakin right there, and then he couldn't do anything more else. Then it was up to the Force whether he survived or not survived. He did survive, becomes even more evil, becomes Darth Vader. But then he also has a spark of salvation and gets redeemed at the end. So had Ben Kenobi killed him right there and then, he would have died unredeemed. It would be the same fate of Judas Iscariot. But in any case, he didn't know what the future was going to hold for him. But he said, this is not my job. So this is left to the judgment of the Force. And that's what we are called as Christians. So ultimately, we're not, who am I to judge? Only God can judge. And so we are called to stop. With regards to violence, well, yeah, I mean, I think in the Clone Wars is where it gets a little bit, we don't know exactly where this is going, because they are supposed to be the guardians of peace and the guardians of justice throughout the galaxy. And here in the Clone Wars, we see them as generals. They are the generals of the troops, the stormtroopers, of the Republic troopers. And so it's like a different role. But again, we can see they're defending, and that's what the role is there for defense. And we have within the Christian tradition, of course, the just war theory and so on, which is the ultimate, this is the last thing we can do, and it's only to stop, to defend, and to search for peace and justice. Whereas the Jedi use it for aggression. So it's basically they use the Force, the violence, to accomplish their power. And so they're using for conquest, to control, to expand their power. And so it's a very different, and that would not be a Christian way, so at all. And so, yeah, I know that some people have criticized the Jedi, but I just read an article which was very, very interesting, which I didn't even really see it until I read the article. It was Luke Skywalker. And so he has to learn the same lesson, that basically when he sees Yoda for the first time in Dagobah, and he's expecting this great warrior, and he says, wars do not make a man great, because that's not the point. The point is peace and balance and so on, and everything that Yoda incarnates there in Dagobah and teaches Luke. And Luke eventually learns. And so when he has to confront his father, he refuses to use Force, because if he gets attacked, then he defends himself. But basically, no, I'm not going to fight you, he says, because this is not the way of the Jedi. Also when he has the opportunity to kill Palpatine, he will not do it, because this is not the way of it. So he has learned that pacifism basically is the way of the Jedi. And in the new trilogy, which, I mean, I still have to reanalyze again because I'm not too sure. But anyway, this article was talking about so when Rey calls him to come back to fight the resistance, and he will not do it, is because he has said, the violence is not the way. That's not the way of the Jedi, And so, she expects him to come back so he will be a warrior. And that's her vision of the Jedi. And so where they're talking to each other, whatever, it's like, yeah, you don't understand what the Jedi are. We're not, that's not what we are, So it's to bring balance to the forces. So it's more of a pacifist outlook. And I think Luke incarnates there. There's other things that happen there in the last movie, but basically that's what the article was saying. And yeah, I kind of agree. And I think that's why also Obi-Wan did not kill. So it was he only performed justice and would not take revenge and so on. And he said, then left the judgment to the Force.
And Father, when you look at this, ultimately long arc to redemption, even if what appears to be the story of Anakin is quite sad and very dark, what takeaways can we take from this? What can we learn from Anakin's journey versus Luke's, for example?
Well, I mean, I think, yeah. So I think that's what we need to do, almost see the two of them. You have to see Anakin and you have to see Luke. Because again, both, so the whole arc shows none of us are perfect. So we all have virtues and we all have vices. Nobody's perfect. But it's how you live your life, how you are making your decisions, towards the light or towards the darkness, to the dark side of the Force or to the light side of the Force. And that makes a difference, The difference, I think, of course, between the Star Wars universe is that a lot of them, for them, is a lot of, it's me through will and training and so on, that I do the good or I do the bad. And as Christians, we know that ultimately we depend upon God. So it's God ultimately that's helping us. But we need to be cooperative with that, to collaborate with the Force, basically. And so to be open to that. And so that, I think that's a difference there. But basically what both Christianity and the Star Wars series is teaching, choices are important, and what choices do we make? And yes, and from where do we make those choices? Because we all have fears, we all have pride, etc. But how do we choose? Do we channel those for the good, or basically we try to control that, try to repress it, and then that brings us to destruction? And I think that's what both Anakin and Luke show. So Anakin basically keeps choosing to control it, to have the power, etc. And so the dark side. And so then that leads to the ultimate, him becoming Darth Vader, somebody who completely different. Whereas Luke is always, here and there, but he's always choosing the good. He's going forward. And we see that till the end, to the point then that he can save his own father. So it's not just a question of saving himself, because he also saw that in the cave in Dagobah. He could have done otherwise. So he also has to kind of redeem himself or be redeemed. But at the same time, now he has reached a certain level where he can redeem somebody else, and he redeems his father. And so that's the final teaching of both Star Wars.
Father, this has been a fascinating conversation. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Well, I mean, I think it's, stories like Star Wars and any kind of mythical stories, I think, they're not the Christian gospel, but I think they do deal with topics that the whole world deals with. The question of vice and virtue, of good and evil, light and darkness, making choices, redemption. I think that's what this great epics, not only Star Wars, but other epics that we have in culture and so on, teaches us. And they're important to study them and to look at them and then compare them to the gospel epic that we have, and how that also enlightens us. And I think the main takeaway, both from Star Wars and Christianity, is that nobody can fall so deep into the dark side that ultimately cannot be brought to the light side. So there's nobody that can fall so much into vice, etc., that cannot be redeemed at the end. And I think that's both the new hope.
That is so important. Father, this has been wonderful. I hope we can do it again soon.
Thank you. Very good.